Oh, it's me, Dave March, the Spy Guy. I've changed it from the ledge, which I had up for a long time because that's for something else that, like, there's a handle I got from some friends on another channel, and that a nickname, and it gets used a lot on X, where they'll call me the ledge. So I really thought I should go back to Spy Guy because I'm Spy Guy reacting, and people come to the video and they see the ledge, and then you don't know what that's all about. So went back for that, but you'll hear me call that occasionally with some of the guests I bring on. I was trying to do the Friday morning poll show with a couple guys there, and I ended up going to a online Zoom Christmas party for the two-way group that I belong with. So that was kind of like, I decided to deal with that instead. And, hang out with holiday friends. I can do a panel with those guys on Monday, likely. And, but I did have a couple redacted videos here that I've been really seem to be kind of my theme right now is to cover these guys. But I do have other videos I do on occasion. But I thought these two kind of caught my eye. It's kind of like an Eastern European thing. And this one is first off is a redacted video about stuff happening in Poland. My father's family is from Krakow region, so it's always of interest to me what's happening in the old country. My mother's family is from Moravia, so that's like southern Germany, Pennsylvanian Dutch as they call themselves. Anyways, start the stream and I'll give you my thoughts as I always do. Thanks. And if I can close down some channels here. Okay, and this is the Polish one.
Well, Poland is on a suicide mission, it seems, part of that crazy boondoggle of European countries that are trying to agitate for a permanent war against Russia. But as you just heard, Colonel Douglas McGregor says NATO.
And we'll be reacting to Colonel Douglas McGregor late as their second video. I have them kind of out of order, but this one I thought was more interesting. I don't necessarily agree that Poland's on a suicide run. Parts of Poland are certainly the fact that they are occupied by the Soviet Union for 40 years and were attacked by the Soviet Union in 1939 and subsequently occupied by our Yahtzee friends, definitely shows that they have some suspicion to be.
Couldn't possibly go to war with Russia. They would lose in a heartbeat. They're not prepared. They're broke. They're falling apart. So
I'm not too sure about the broke and falling apart. I've heard lots of good things that Poland is actually one of the few countries in growth in Poland, in Europe right now. What was a Polish growth rate? I'll look that up. Polish economic growth. They only have a 3.5% growth rate. I mean, oh my God, they're probably unlike most of Europe. They are pretty good. They're doing pretty well. Good. 3.5%, and we'd like that in Canada, pretty much. Yep. So what do we got here for KPIs? Domestic consumption. A lot of EU investment. Their own domestic investment. Last year they went from 2023 at 0.1% growth to 2024 grew by 2.9%, and their growth this year has been 3.3 to 3.5%. And it looks expected to remain strong, going potentially moderating as EU funding winds down and fiscal tightening begins. And they do have a bit of a deficit because of social spending. Yes, long-term growth hinges on reforms to boost labor supply and productivity. Just AI overview from Google.
Why is Poland trying to poke the bear? Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk on Tuesday said during talks with Ukraine upon a possible peace deal that U.S. officials vowed that the U.S. be willing to take military action against Russia as part of this peace agreement if it violates any sort of future ceasefire. Then we heard from Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, saying Russia will be devastated. We will devastate Russia.
With what? With what? Poland's trying to double the size of its military from 150,000 to 300,000. It's not going very well. Why? Because the local domestic economies booming. They have plans to bring in like all these Korean tanks and M1s and really to expand their military force up significantly. But even then, 300,000 is against 2 million. And why is Poland doing this? Because we have a lot of, look, speaking as a Pole, I don't like Germans. I don't like Russians. I don't like Ukrainians, which makes Christmas fun since I have a lot of Ukrainian relatives there. I don't like Austrians. I don't like Hungarians. And I don't like Lithuanian. I'm unsure about Lithuania despite having a centuries-long alliance with that country. Look, say it's Eastern Europe. Like, we don't like we have reasons why we don't like all our neighbors going back 1,000 years. Now, that being said, when I say I don't like that, I look at it as in the way that I'm not told Russians this, where I look at like a long-standing Stanley Cup feud between the Maple Leafs and Montreal Canadiens. That's kind of how I look at it right now. No one's shooting at anybody, but I look at you as our rivals in the area, and Ukraine was what we used to fight over, among other things. We also had a lot of Eastern expansion. But it's always hard for Americans who are no longer who haven't. I know all this because of history. I read the Polish, one good English book on the Polish White Eagle Red. Anyways, the book on the Russo-Polish War. People just do not understand all the things that happened here and how much of it's all going back 1,000 years of rivalry.
They violated any sort of ceasefire agreement. We want to go after them. But Poland's not wasting any time. They're lining up now a new tranche of massive amounts of landmines that'll be sitting on the Polish border. Poland is ramping up this program to lay these anti-personnel mines on their eastern border, and it plans to deploy them along the eastern border and export them also to Ukraine. Of course, this is, if I'm not mistaken, a violation of like a decades-long agreement to not use these types of things. But okay, so Poland is girding its loins for a permanent war with Russia. Dr. Mike Krupa is the host of a brand new YouTube show and podcast called the DR Global Podcast. You can find it on YouTube. One of the, as I always say, the smartest man in all of Poland, and he joins us now. Mike, great to see you. Welcome back to the show. Merry Christmas to you.
Thank you, guys. Great to be back.
What do you make of this move by Poland? An economy that's in trouble, a people that are not interested in any kind of war with Russia.
Once again, we just went over the economic numbers. Poland's doing pretty good, unlike most of Europe. I think there's a little bit of projection going on here.
Why are the leaders in Poland really moving your country towards like a suicide mission?
Well, I think it's a narrative that's prevalent in all of Europe. The quicker we're seeing the end of this war, I think the end is nearer than it was, a year or 2 years ago. The breakdown of the Ukrainian army, the acceleration of the Russian moves on the front, and the general, degradation of Europe militarily and economically, plus the pressure with all the chaos obviously emanating from it, but nonetheless the pressure coming from the United States to end this war, basically has thrown a wrench into this entire operation of let's try and strategically weaken Russia. And one of the things that, the governing elites in Europe want to keep is to at least make sure that the public opinion in each of these countries, the major European Union countries, continues to believe that Russia is on the verge of invading the rest of Europe, which is obviously nonsense. It was always nonsense.
Yeah, Europe's too busy getting invaded by the Muslims to be from Libya and Afghanistan and all this place. Why would Russia want to rule over that?
it behooves. I don't even know how to respond to such a claim because it's just so ridiculous. I mean, there's more rationality to the claim, I think, that Maduro was exporting drugs to the United States
Right.
than that Russia is planning an invasion of Europe, even though that first statement is also absurd. But I think it's a desperate act. I think it's throwing money into garbage. Obviously, in Poland we also have our own mini military industrial complex. People need to make money, and the company that is going to apparently supply these anti-personnel mines, from what I read in that Reuters report, is a Polish company. So there's a lot of money to be made. But as I said, it's performative actions to keep the public opinion, or at least the segment of the public opinion that voted for the governing coalition currently in power in Poland, to make them continue stew in that, soup of fear of Russia, and make sure that the level of that fear doesn't go down in any way.
How is life in Poland right now for the average Polish person, given this war that's been on your doorstep for many years now?
Well, like in other parts of Europe, we're dealing with inflation. Obviously, that's been a kicker in the ass, so to say. Unfortunately, we've been flooded with a couple of million of Ukrainian migrants, sometimes called refugees, which has brought significant burdens not only to our economy, to our housing market, but in the most fundamental areas, such as internal security. If you look at the crime statistics in Poland right now, Ukrainians, unfortunately, are on the top when it comes to foreigners. So that.
Oh yeah, there's like, I'm not saying they're all criminals or that, but they definitely have. You went from one of the least corrupt countries in Europe has just been invaded by millions of people from the most corrupt country in Europe, or it's sheltering. And Ukrainians are not really welcome right now. They kind of wore out their welcome amongst the Polish people, from what I understand, and to the point where it's safer for Ukrainians to speak Russian than Ukrainian. It's getting that bad there, and it's like Poland wants this war to end so they can send all these people back to where they came from. Plus, like I said, bad blood between Ukrainians and Poles. Like, some people know this. People talk about things like the Holodomor. Well, half of Ukraine didn't go through the Holodomor because they were in Poland, where they were running, and then where that Stepan Bandera guy was going around creating like a terrorist movement to get Poland out of that part of what they thought, I think, is Ukraine. So Silesia, is it Silesia? No, Silesia is in Germany. Anyways, so that is a whole other story. So like, there is bad blood. Also, you just read about what the Banderites did to Polish people during World War II and the aftermath. It is like not good. Like, they would fling people against trees to save bullets. Okay. They would have a choir appear in front of the house where they were doing a pogrom and like killing the Poles, or they were killing the Jews that were in there. And they would have them sing, the choir would sing to cover up the screams coming from inside the house. So there's a lot of bad blood between these various groups. This is Eastern Europe. We should not be involved in Eastern Europe.
That hasn't made Poland safer. We've obviously given up any pretense of being a responsible power in this region of Europe. We should be a power that is, facilitating negotiations between Russia and Ukraine and the United States, just like, Viktor Orban is doing in Hungary. Robert Fico is trying to do in Slovakia, and we have a turn in politics, obviously, right now in the Czech Republic, with Andrej Babiš coming to power and reasserting Czech sovereignty in the face of the behemoth in Brussels, the EU, and taking a strong stand against this pro-war radicalism that has engulfed Europe. So in Poland, unfortunately, we're in a situation where nobody in the public opinion, and the polls show this, doesn't want a war with Russia. The negative attitude towards Ukrainians in Poland, every single poll in the last 2 years is confirming that this negativity is only on the rise. But the government doesn't seem to care because, unfortunately, there are still people in Poland who, don't realize that there has been an internet revolution. They still take their news from the mainstream media, unfortunately. And that populace is the one that still gives the votes to the liberal governing coalition. Obviously, they're mostly boomer types, so they're slowly moving to that other world, so to say. But unfortunately, there's still a voice in Polish politics. And once that generational shift happens, by way of information, I just want to tell you that in the last poll that was conducted in Poland, Grzegorz Braun's Confederation of the Polish Crown Party has 11%. So that's actually a pretty good sign because the Confederation of the Polish Crown is the most, as you well know, you've had Grzegorz on your show, consequentially anti-war, pro-sovereignty, anti-globalist party in Poland. So their rise is a good sign for things to come. It definitely shows that especially the young under 40 electorate is voting completely differently than their parents, which is a very good sign.
So can I say it bluntly then? Are young people in Poland, they've had enough? They do not want war?
Of course. There is no constituency for war among the under 40 crowd in Poland. There is no constituency for open borders. And I would even say there is no strong constituency for the maintaining of the European Union, at least in its current form in Poland's.
Yeah, I'm interested in this Polish Crown Party that he's talking about here, and found a site that looks to be called Notes from Poland. So hopefully it is not as nuts as I didn't even want to go look at CIA program from Wikipedia. I didn't even know what the CIA wanted to know. So here we go. A new opinion poll shows a party of far-right leader Braun of the Confederation of the Polish Crown Party, reaching third place for the first time at 11%. So PIS is at so the Traditional Workers Farmers Party, the PIS, is at 31%. The governing party is at 35%. And then there's another party that's called Confederetka. There's two. That's always good to see. There's two far-right parties, whatever the hell that means. And they're both polling at around 11%. Plus the PIS. So it's 31. So that means 42, 53. Okay. The Wika is at 5%, which they're the left wing. And together, Razem has 4%. Because, I once interviewed a guy years ago who was an American expat living in Poland, and he said, "It's a great thing about this country. Both the parties are right wing." Major political parties. And of course, the Farmers Worker Party had been in power and he was supporting them. He was telling us he was going to have dinner with the prime minister. And so basically the KO party would be like the neocon party, free trade, low regulation, hawkish on war, versus the PIS party, which is the Farmers or the Workers Party, which is more, the countryside versus the city elite, but they're both right wing. So basically, America First versus the neoconservatives. So the W party versus the other party. So it's going back between two right wing parties, and now you have two other far right parties coming in at 20% between the two of them. So that's good news whenever Tusk loses his majority and goes to general elections. And of course, the president of Poland is anti-war. That's he decided not to run. He ran as an independent, but he's basically the PIS Farmers and Workers Party a candidate.
Continued presence in the European Union. There's many more Eurosceptics in the under 40 crowd that has, that uses basically the instruments that we have on the internet of dissident media, of alternative media sites, and doesn't rely on their information space to be their television set and basically the two or three two private, one state-owned channels that basically feed the same BS with some degrees of difference, but not much. So, yeah, there is hope. But as I said, despite the problems, you will not find in general a constituency in Poland for war with Russia. That's for sure. So, the government even realizes this because they'll say, we're not going to send any troops to Ukraine. We're going to sort of bandwagon with the rest of Europe, but at least we're showing that we're strong, that we're assertive. So we're going to place, a couple of 100,000 anti-personnel mines on the border with Kaliningrad and so on, which is kind of ironic if you think about it, because the former minister of Foreign Affairs in Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, who, by the way, is hanging out right now from what I saw with his girlfriend, some very high-end opera, he actually made some statements back in 2024 where he said that, this was actually stated in Poland, he said that certain areas of the current makeup of the Polish Republic are actually Ukrainian territories. And that stirred a lot of indignation and anger, even from the Polish government, which demanded a retraction. But also in 2022, Kuleba presented then Secretary of State Blinken in his office with a historic map of Ukraine that actually included two current Polish cities. So there is...
Yeah. Okay. Historic map of Ukraine. I'm sorry, Ukraine only existed from 1917 onwards. I'm sure that there's been no Ukraine before 1917. So the idea that I'm sure that historic map was probably the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, when Germany was using Ukrainians in World War I. Germany was using Ukrainians to help support their imperial ambitions after they carved out basically most of modern Ukraine out of Russia.
Is an appetite among Ukrainian nationalists for certain areas of eastern and southeastern Poland to be returned to Ukraine. They claim it's historical Ukrainian lands. So I would argue if we were to put any anti-personnel mines, we should put them on the border with Ukraine and not with Russia and Belarus.
Oh, wow. You can make some headlines with that one, but it's hard to argue with that. Doctor, we'll get you out of here on this energy issues all across Europe. You're seeing the collapse of Germany right now. You're seeing protests from Paris to Brussels today. I mean, farmers have had enough of these globalist pigs. What is the energy situation like for you guys in Poland right now?
Well, we've got news that an American company we've actually received the blessing from the European Union. This was big news recently in Poland that we're going to finally have our own atomic energy factory. It's going to be built by an American company. I forgot which American company at this point. It's kind of late here in Poland. Sorry about that. Yeah. But we realized that there's this undercurrent of thinking that, Russian gas was cheap, but we had to cut ourselves off because everybody else was doing it, and we don't want to be subservient to, the Russians in that regard. There's been a lot of talk about buying American Freedom Gas, LNG, bringing also it from Qatar. But the energy situation in Poland is basically the same as in the rest of Europe. So energy prices have gone up ever since the start of the war. The only sane person in that regard seems to be Viktor Orban, who basically plays a really hard-hitting game of realpolitik, because not only does he get cheap Russian gas, but he also gets exemptions from the United States to continue buying the cheap Russian gas. That's why I call, Viktor Orban the sort of virtuoso of realism in Europe, which he definitely is. So we're pretty much in the same, bandwagon as the rest of Europe when it comes to energy prices. I was surprised to see, well, not really surprised, but you probably heard the news that one of Volkswagen's sub-headquarters was actually closed down recently in Germany, which is like, really? Volkswagen is closing down in Germany? The first thing that comes to mind is, sure, more sanctions will definitely resolve this problem. Right. So in general, I guess we would say we have the same problems as the rest of Europe. The real estate market in Poland is actually, when it comes to prices, in the top 5, if not 3. So in that regard, the effects of mass immigration, unfortunately, are hitting us pretty hard. But all in all, I guess we would say same problems, just more of a wider country, I guess, at least up until now.
Yeah. Dr. Mike Krupa, we hope you have a Merry Christmas there. Check out the new DR Global podcast, which you just launched, so people can check that out and subscribe and listen in. And thank you for staying up so late with us there. I think it's like 10:45 p.m. in Warsaw, Poland.
10:45
right
p.m. Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Also, a blessed and Merry Christmas to you guys. And for all fans out there, all the information about my new podcast you can find on my Twitter. We launched today our first interview with Professor Richard Sakpa. So hope all to see you.
Okay, well, it's good to hear from that. Yeah, I've just been looking up some of the stuff here, more information on what's going on with Poland and this. So the nuclear power plant is getting 16 billion zloty, or 14.2 billion euros. It is going to be an SMR type nuclear reactor, and it is going to make 3.75 gigawatts of energy, which is good. That's really the solution to all these problems, is just creating nuclear power plants. The Canadian plan, Green Energy Plan, is just build nuclear power plants. And if we're smart, like we did in Ontario, put them in key ridings, swing ridings, everyone loves nuclear power. It's often like the prime industry in a lot of places in Ontario, for example. Every party has to be pro-nuclear because they want to get elected. Okay, so I'm looking at this Confederation Party. Which blends Catholic ultra-conservatism, I'm not sure I like that, economic libertarianism, monarchism, and anti-EU sentiment, now built on that success. Who would be the Polish king that we'd restore? They've been gone for a while. Has anyone left to the Polish king? Is this thing still a thing? Polish nuclear, Polish monarch. Yeah, we lost them in 1795. Like, the royal family still around? I'm just like looking for this because, like, I guess they'd have to create a new dynasty. I don't know if any of the current dynasties are. Oh yeah, the Diet. The Poland had the ability to, after the Jagiellonians, Polish kings were elected by the nobles, leading to powerful families like the Lesniewski and the last dynasty, the Poniatowskis. So I guess they would just elect a new king. That'd be interesting. Okay, so Braun, who is the leader, and I'm not going to get into his first name, is a member of the European Parliament, and KPP were until this year part of the broader Confederation, which was formed in 2018 by a coalition of far-right movements in order to stand jointly in elections. Whatever far-right means in Europe. This one, however, he and his party were ejected from the alliance in January of this year after they announced the presidential candidacy, despite Confederation having picked another of its leaders, Slawomir Mencen, as its official candidate. He has a long history of promoting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Last month, he said that the Polish government is implementing directives presented by various Jewish organizations, and the gas chambers at Auschwitz were fake. Great. Sounds like a real fun guy. Oh, and then we got Jew Masons. Okay, that's weird. But this is Eastern Europe. There's a lot of weird things that happen in that region of the world. He's been put on trial accused of crimes relating to four incidents, most infamously an attack on the celebration of a Jewish festival of Hanukkah in Parliament. And yeah, sounds like a real winner, this guy. They have campaigned against what they call the Ukrainization of Poland, suggesting that a large number of Ukrainian refugees and immigrants are a threat to Polish identity and sovereignty. Sort of. Having sympathies towards links to Russia. In September, after Russian drones violated Polish airspace, he claimed that the incident was faked as part of a conspiracy involving Poland's own government to drag the country into the war in Ukraine. What I could tell from that is that Ukrainian jammed some drones and they landed. These type of drones are decoys, chaff. So they're designed to force other drones. You fly these drones to give protection to the other drones that actually have a lethal payload. So it was just not. It's just not a conspiracy. But I think a lot of people in Poland rightly believe that it could be. He's called for de-escalation and normalization of Polish-Russian relations. Like I've said a few times, Russia doesn't want to have 45 million Roman Catholics, and Putin doesn't want 45 million Roman Catholics in his burgeoning Eastern Orthodox Empire. That's just not something he's interested in. The reasons why the Russians conquered the Poles no longer applies anymore. It's just like they don't really want a bunch of people. They just don't want us or the Baltic states anymore. We're kind of like Poland's really just Polish now. So just concentrated there. That's why Stalin made all the land transfers back at the end of the Second World War, and or I should say population transfers, so that you would have the Poles were in Poland, the Lithuanians were in Lithuania, the Estonians were in Estonia, and the Germans had to just move. So he effectively created these blocks because he wanted to reduce all the minorities he wanted to reduce minority agitation. So he created like solid block countries of populations. So that was that thing. Now I'm going on to the second one. Share the screen here. This is kind of interesting.
That we want to share with you. These numbers are incredibly hard to swallow. Until now, these numbers have not been fully reported on the Russian side specifically, because a lot of people would be upset to hear these numbers. As of today, December 18th, I'm going to throw up our non-pretty graphic here on the screen to walk you through this.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I kind of balked in initial when I saw these numbers, but then I found out what it is, what the numbers actually meant. So, because I saw 642,000 Russians killed, and I was like, that's BS. But when you get through the breakdown, and I'll let him break it down.
The number of people killed in Ukraine as of today, 1.3 million, 77,045. And here's how that breaks down. Ukrainian soldiers killed is 1,009,367. NATO soldiers killed, including mercenaries, active and contractors, 297,894 dead. Civilians.
Yeah, those are like a lot of those mercenaries are like, we had a Canadian contingent, we had a Polish contingent, we had other guys in there, what they call sheep dip. There's a lot of Poles that went over there and other people who fought on the side of Ukraine, kind of like Spanish and the Freedom Brigades. So that's what we're dealing with. I never really thought. Some of them I have no doubt were mercenaries. Some of them were soldiers from countries that were serving with the Ukrainians. But a lot of these people I don't look as in the same way as real mercenaries. I think a lot of these guys were like, ethnically Ukrainian, or adventurers, or what have you, and you get that in all wars. So I don't think they should be treated necessary unless they do war crimes, which a lot of them did. They should not be considered mercenaries in the classic sense.
Killed by Russia in Ukraine, 1,883. Civilians killed by Ukraine in Ukraine, meaning they have killed a lot of their own people, as you know, and we've been covering that for years. That number is 67,901. 19,149 missing civilians. And across all categories, and of course, we've been reporting on that missing number, which of course is very interesting because a lot of Ukrainian mothers, fathers, they've been classified as missing, therefore they don't have to receive death benefits. And that's how that works in Ukraine. So that number is very high on the missing side, probably dead, unfortunately. Specifically on the civilian side, but on the soldier side too, the missing. Across all categories, that number is 2.3 million people dead in Ukraine, captured, missing, or injured in Ukraine. Now to the Russian side. 642,014 Russians have been killed. Of that number, 182,042 of them are contracted military or mercenaries.
And you should know, when I show you up the media zona numbers, that tracks very well. They do a 50%. They have 145,000 confirmed killed in media zona, with a 50% topping up to 220, which I don't think is unreasonable. If the number is 182, that tracks.
The number of Russian civilians killed by Ukraine is 51,874.
Can I ask, are we considering Russians part of the annexed Russia? People who voted to be Russians but were formerly thought to be Ukrainians? Do we know? Maybe we don't know.
That's a good question. Of the civilians killed by Ukraine in Ukraine, that number that we showed you earlier of the 67,000, a large portion of those, of course, former Eastern Ukraine.
Okay.
So to be clear, but I'll get some more distinction on that.
Yeah, so the number of Russian civilians killed by Ukraine is 52,000. That's probably from when they did that counteroffensive to try and take out that nuclear power plant or capture the nuclear missiles. The Kursk offensive, I believe it was, that the salient they created. And there's also been a lot of cross-border raids into Russia where that's happened a fair bit.
The number of Russian civilians injured by Ukraine is 77,411. The number of Russian civilians killed by Russia, 21. The number of Russian civilians killed by Russia, 21. The total, 642,000 killed.
Friendly fire, no doubt.
Killed and 429,000 injured. That number total on the Russian side is 1,076,821. We've also learned that Russia has covertly tested 3 new weapon systems over the past 28 days. 2 of them are complete game changers.
Oh, and it is interesting that we didn't see how many Russian soldiers are wounded.
This is making the deep state very nervous, as you can imagine, inside of NATO. These haven't been made public yet by President Putin, which he normally does, but these 3 are still being kept quiet. Here's one that isn't being kept secret. Russian President Putin just rolled out their most advanced hypersonic missiles to date, missiles that no one can shoot down unless we're totally wrong about that. We'll get some clarity from Colonel McGregor in a moment on that. This would make NATO really look like a nursery school class with these hypersonic missiles. These are the Oreshnik hypersonic missiles. They're set for combat duty by the end of the year. It's capable of extremely high speeds, long-range strikes. Of course, it marks the development NATO is going to be watching very, very closely. Mm-hmm. And yet European leaders have some sort of a suicide wish. I mean, you saw all those horrible numbers that we just showed you. They want to be a part of it, I guess. They want to be a part of the death and destruction in the Europe.
because they are so disconnected from World War. We've become so disconnected from war and World War II and all this other stuff that our leadership class just doesn't understand. There was a podcast, I think it was called the 0.5% podcast, because that's how many people go into the U.S. military anymore. Or was it 2%? Something ridiculously low number. So our civilian leaders have no idea what conflict is like because nobody serves anymore.
European Union and in the UK, preparing to go to war with Russia directly. German Chancellor Merz said yesterday they are ready to draft young men to war if they can't reach their volunteer numbers. Yes, compulsory service to fight Russia. The UK is telling its populace that they need to get ready to sacrifice their sons and daughters. Watch.
We'll skip. I think we'll skip ahead of that. You've already heard my comments on that yesterday, and it's just a matter of like I said, I think the conscription riots are going to be interesting television. We had them here in World War I in Canada. World War II, it was a little different. But yeah, it's
to talk about today. Congress yesterday voted against Thomas Massey's war power bill that would have limited the president's ability to bomb Venezuela. And then the other one, of course, which would have limited the president's ability to just bomb in the Western Hemisphere. So there were two different bills. And all of this is happening right now as the Pentagon plans a major reorganization. And our next guest is calling for Pete Hegseth to basically clean house of those four-star generals who are stuck in the past at the Pentagon. Colonel Douglas Macgregor is here to weigh in about all of these war developments. Now, Colonel, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. I actually wish I were out in Colorado, but that's another story.
By the way, Colonel Macgregor served with Daniel Davis from the Deep Dive, which we watch here on the channel, and he had a very successful attack in the Iraq War where they trained like no tomorrow to fight. Actually, once was supposed to write a book with this guy, and he had served at a different battle in the first Gulf War. And he had the story of like, you haven't lived till you're driving a Bradley down the road, and then a tarp comes up, and some Arab's got an RPG point and firing at your Bradley. And I'm like, you know what? I could do without that kind of living. Like an experience I could do without.
As close as you are to the craziness in the Beltway. Colonel, I want to put up your piece here. You talk about slashing the military and getting rid of these four-star generals, not to do it halfway. There's plans to basically move away from the era of the past and move into modernity, whatever that would actually look like. You can comment on that and really anything that's on your mind today, because all of these stories are pretty nebulous, I guess.
Oh, great. You're talking about a stream of consciousness interview. I don't get those very much.
I know. I'm feeling it today, though. I just want to hear from you because a lot of these topics.
Give us some Christmas cheer or lack thereof.
These topics are so damn heady, the numbers we just rattled off and everything that we're seeing,
Well, as somebody once said, this too shall pass. That's the good news. The bad things will not last forever. First of all, on the American military establishment, we have been growing the overhead at a rate that makes no sense now for more than 30 years. We began this process back in the early 80s with what we call the Unified Command Plan. And this was something that Eisenhower tried to implement when he was president, simply said, we have to have theaters. We have to have a direction of activity effort. And then we have to build up the support infrastructure and logistics. We finally got around to that with the Unified Command Plan. And then, of course, by the mid-90s, it became pretty clear that, the justification for this pursuit of global military hegemony was no longer justified, and that we could ratchet back, if you will. We could skim or at least thin the overhead. When I say overhead, we're talking about 43, 44 four-star generals.
Yeah, so he's going to explain that. But you have to understand, a four-star general is not just a lot of money and experience jammed into one place. A four-star general has a staff, and that staff of all these lesser generals, and each general is getting their own airplane that's flying them about doing different things. And so you get this giant little nucleus of staff that surrounds the 4-star, and it has all the support elements. And each one of those lesser generals gets their own staff, and it goes down the line until you have that. And I told a friend of mine once, who's been interviewed on this channel a few times, I was like, look, every general has a colonel whose job it is to not let the general hear bad news. And he said to me, I guess I was done. That's why I didn't get to be a general, because I let my generals know the truth.
For a force of perhaps 1.18 million. And at the height of the Second World War, this is 1943, early 44, we had 7 4-stars running the entire armed forces. And at that point, we were talking about...
You had a few 5-stars as well.
6 to 8 million people. So, clearly, we don't need as many people in the 4- and 3-star rank categories. Then along came 2001, and we got this AUMF, this, the authorization for the use of military force. One of the provisions of that was more generals, more admirals. And of course, there's nothing the Pentagon likes more than adding admirals and generals and headquarters. And this sort of thing has gotten out of control. And President Trump understands this, but you have to have a strategy to go from what you've got today to something that's leaner and more effective. Mm-hmm. And that strategy doesn't exist right now. And that's why I wrote this paper and said, here are 7 points. These are the things that you really need to consider as you go forward. Because what I see happening in the Department of Defense, I'm supposed to say Department of the War, with the Secretary of War, is that they have some good ideas and they sort of say, well, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Yeah, let's do that, without thinking through carefully the total reorientation of our military power to defense of the United States preeminently, primarily in the Western Hemisphere, and its vital interests. And those vital interests tend to revolve around access to something we call the global commons. That means air, sea, land, space that may be of importance to us, where there are minerals, resources, and so forth. And that's in everybody's interest. And we should be interested not only in our own access, but ensuring access for everybody else. Anyway, that's what it is in a nutshell. And could we go to that? Yes, we can. But you need a plan, a real strategy. And that was the outline of what I tried to present in that article. I don't want to go through it in detail. Everybody will become bored. And that's bad. So we want to keep everybody interested. So I'll tell you, read through the 7 points, because it covers the waterfront. And can we do it? Yes. But are we going to get there with what we're doing now? No. And by the way, let's not confuse national defense with intervention in Venezuela. The two are not the same.
Ladies and gentlemen, our world is being...
Let's skip ahead through the commercial. But yeah, what he's saying there about all the stuff we have to... Because all the stuff we, like I said, headquarters staff, and also just the parochial nature of things. So Nixon is president back in the 70s, and someone comes up to him and says, hey, we have all these buildings that are going unused in Washington, D.C. Can we sell them off or do something with them? And he's like, you're the president. Why can't you get rid of that? And he's like, yeah, I am the president. I can get rid of those things. So he goes out and suddenly, he's like sends out the executive order to get it dismantled or whatever. And then all these admirals start showing up, explaining to them why these things were so necessary, and start giving them briefings and all this other stuff. And he's like, and it was just feather nesting for a few admirals in Washington, D.C. that they didn't want to lose control of these buildings. And the way Nixon handled it was to stop all promotions in the Navy above the rank of captain, because he had to sign off on those. And it didn't take long for the Navy to agree to get rid of the buildings as soon as they realized how serious it was. Like, yeah, well, you're just going to have to run that 3-star shop on your 2-star salary. Oh, well, maybe we can get rid of these things. Yeah, maybe you can.
because at this point, that's what's going on. I mean, it's being quietly admitted. I think it's becoming more and more public that we've gone back to quantitative easing. We don't call it that, but we're using different kinds of mechanisms to inject liquidity into the system. The problem is that you're debasing the dollar. And we talk about reshoring manufacturing. That's a great idea. That takes decades. It's not something that President Trump can snap his finger and make happen. So right now, I think the order of the day should be pulling in from overseas commitments, reducing the bases overseas, get out of places where we obviously have no mission anymore. There's no requirement for us to be in Northeast Asia, on the Korean Peninsula, or for that matter in Japan. And the Koreans and the Japanese can handle the requirement. We need to start looking at allies as not so much as dependents, but people who are going to pull their own weight, so that if we're going to be allied with someone, it's a benefit.
Yeah.
A great example was in 1905-06, the British came into an alliance with Imperial Japan because they could no longer afford to maintain this enormous Royal Navy in the Pacific. They said, look, we can't afford it, can't do it. Turn to the Japanese. Can you look after our interests? Because we really can't do it. We need a strong presence in the West, strong presence in the Atlantic, in the Mediterranean. Can you help us out? And the Japanese said yes, in return for which the Japanese said, can you help us build up our Navy? Can you?
Yeah, I should cover that treaty one day. It's kind of an interesting thing. Where the British and Japanese agreed to go to war with each other, basically they carved up China. China said, look, you can have this part of China. Basically, Japan said, we want the ability to go to war with China if we need to. And the British are like, okay, if that's what you need to do, we're okay with that. But we might need your backup on other things. So like I said in a previous video, I think the Japanese, the British made a big mistake cutting off Japanese in exchange for the American to try to go more pro-America. I think Japan would have not gone as crazy nationalistic as it did in the direction of World War II, had the British maintained more of a relationship with them.
Assist us with the technology and the training that we need. And of course, the British said yes. And that alliance, by the way, lasted all the way through World War I and into the early 1920s. In other words, the British were prudent, and they said, we need to ally with someone else who's strong, who could compensate for where we are weak. We're not doing that. And that's what we should do in the future. And right now, Northeast Asia is a place where we don't need to be. So then you turn to Europe and you ask the same question. You hear every day people in Europe say, oh, we have more resources and more people and more capability than the Russians. Just look at our economy and so forth.
Yeah, that's totally true. That's why the Russians by themselves, with a third of the people, have fought all of NATO, including the United States, to a standstill.
Well, if that's true, then what are we doing on the ground in Europe? Let's back out of this. Let's start focusing on what's really important to us. That's the kind of thinking that's required, and I think this is a good time to execute it. But unfortunately, that's not what President Trump is doing. It may be what he wants to do, but it's like everything else. You've got to listen to what someone says, but you've also got to watch what they do.
Yes.
And what the administration is doing is an extension of the Biden administration. That's the problem.
Do you see that with Ukraine as well? I mean, we gave you those horrible numbers now off the top of the show. You see the rollout of these new hypersonic missiles. You see the saber rattling from NATO. You heard from Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, yesterday for compulsory military service if they can't fill their volunteer ranks right now. You've got Germany that's collapsing. You have farmers that are smashing their tractors into the capital in Brussels today and in France. They're demanding a change. They want Ursula von der Leyen out. They are absolutely fed up. And their main missions.
Ursula von der Crazy. Let's call her by her proper name. Von der Crazy.
Seems to be, let's go to war with Russia.
Yeah, well, everybody wants Ursula von der Leyen to go away. So I'm assuming that will eventually happen. Yeah. The problem is this. You're right. There's no chance of Europe going to war with Russia. It's not going to happen. When I say Europe, I'm talking about the various members of NATO. They're broke. Their financial condition is terrible. Their living standards are dropping like rocks, especially in Germany, but not just in Germany, in France as well. And this is the globalist regime or class trying desperately to keep the war going, because they know that when the war stops, when it becomes obvious that the Russians aren't coming and there will be no war, they're gone. Increasingly, people inside Germany and France and Great Britain are figuring out that they've been lied to. What's really depressing is to listen to someone like that British officer who really has an obligation to tell the truth, just spew out this crazy fiction about a war that Britain absolutely positively does not need to fight and would be suicidal for Britain to even seriously consider. But, you know, you've built this mountain of lies on the assumption that Russia is something it's not. It's the Soviet Union. No, it isn't. It has all the land and resources that it needs. It doesn't necessarily want more territory. If the Russians were even close to what people describe them as being, they would already be on the Polish border. You know, they certainly
are on the Polish border. They have 360,000 troops in Belarus. So the country of 5 million people, so that's a lot of troops. And then, of course, Kaliningrad, but that's a special case.
Have been willing to sustain losses in order to kill the enemy and win. And they have just taken in hundreds of thousands of additional manpower that they're going to train and equip and put into the army. They are ready to fight. And that's what Putin's message was. And that's what everybody should hear very quickly. He said repeatedly, we're not interested in going to war with anybody in Europe. We're not interested in conquering Europe. And if you don't like the way we're conducting operations at Ukraine, you need to understand something. We don't want to kill Orthodox Christian Slavs. We're not trying to kill Ukrainians. We'd rather not. We want to put an end to this. We want a neutral Ukraine that will not be hostile to us in the future, that will not present a threat to us. That's what we're doing. However, if you attack us, we are prepared for war, and you will find out what real war is, because that's not what we have waged.
Yeah. And I'm suddenly reminded of that my favorite Star Trek episode, Taste of Armageddon, where Kirk wanders into these two people who are busy disintegrating each other because they made war and so neat and painless. Well, that whole I always love that thing where Uhura turns around when Scotty says, your cities have been attacked. Scotty's like, your cities have been put into our targeting computer in less than 90 minutes. Every part of your planet will be destroyed.
In Ukraine.
So where is the anti-war movement best represented in America right now? Because on Wednesday night, everyone on X freaked out that President Trump was going to make a war announcement. And really what he did was kind of a victory lap of the things that he liked the best about his second administration. And so we breathed a sigh of collective relief. But on the same day, Congress declined to vote in favor of withdrawal from Venezuela. And the Senate passed the new defense budget, which prevents the president from withdrawing from Europe and South Korea. So Congress is saying, when you're ready, we're going to let you do whatever you're going to do whenever you're ready, sir. Both sides.
Dogs rolling over that, you want to rub their stomach.
So we didn't get the war announcement, but we are inching towards it in several hemispheres. So where is the anti-war movement best represented in American politics besides independent media?
I think, interestingly enough, in the banking system and with the Fed, because we're going to go bankrupt. We are on the verge of complete financial disaster. And you can bring on Peter Schiff or Luke Groman or Mohammed El-Arian or Nassim Taleb or anybody else. They will all tell you the same thing. Taylor Kenney, Natalie Brunell, they're out there and they've been telling you exactly what's coming. Nobody has listened. And the goal is to anesthetize the American people. What do you do with them? You tell them everything's fine. I'm giving you more freebies next year, more free money, lower taxes. And in the meantime, we have this button over here and it says print more money, and they hit the button and out comes more dollars that flow into people's bank accounts. And they're saying, don't worry, be happy. It's not going to last. We are on the verge of free falling into an abyss, the likes of which no one has seen since the Depression. And everybody with a brain knows that and has said so. Now, in the meantime, why is Congress not recognizing this? Because it's not popular.
Yep.
They're afraid to tell the truth. It's easier to lie, frankly. And remember, every congressman wears a little American flag up here on the lapel. And that's so in the left hand, he has the flag he waves. And the other hand is held out for the lobbyists, whoever they are, whether it's the Israel lobby, the pharmaceutical lobby, the agricultural lobby, whatever it is, Monsanto, all the big donors. And that's what's happening. And they know that their donors won't give them any money unless they spend money. All you have to do is ask the average congressman or senator, what do you do up here in Washington, D.C.? And they will tell you, we spend money.
Yeah.
And they say, if we don't spend money, we have no job.
Yeah.
That's what we do. And we're rewarded for spending money by donations. And we're rewarded by our constituents. We get reelected because we keep shoveling money in directions that are rewarding to us, whether they make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, there is no national interest involved. It's a collective interest, but it's a collective interest in self-enrichment and perpetuating themselves in office. And that's it. And no one is going to figure this out until we collapse. And that's what we're going to do in 2026.
Something else that's not in our national interest, and that's a great answer, Colonel. We'll get you out of here on this, though, which is we have no interest. Ask any American, do you have an interest in being in Syria? And I'm sure the families of those soldiers who just...
Yeah, so I'm going to call it here on this one. I thought it was just because we've been covering stuff like the Russian casualty figures, and that I really wanted to bring in. But this is a lot more of a roundtable thing. So I wanted to get up to the British Alliance and just pointing out how we can resolve many of these things. So I'm going to cut the video there, and I'm going to say, hey, well, it's been a nice day watching and talking and reviewing the videos with you guys. And if you like this kind of content and want to see more, be sure to hit like, share, subscribe, and tell people about my show. Thank you very much. I hope it has been news and entertainment. Okay, educational. Thank you. Bye-bye.